Alright, today we're going to do the second video for Unit 5, the biosphere. So go ahead and answer today's question, what is an ecosystem and what are ecosystems made up of? We talked about that in yesterday's video, Biosphere 1. And go ahead and answer that in those first few blanks there on your paper. And we're going to go ahead and get into the second portion of Biosphere today. So we're going to talk about community ecology and biomes. So we talked about ecosystems and we talked about primary producers, we talked about consumers, we talked about individuals. Today we're going to talk about the ecosystem in general. So ecosystems that are developed on bare rock or ground that has been newly exposed through a process of what we call primary succession. Okay, so that's what we call our ecosystem that's new to develop. And this is going to continue until it reaches what we call a climax community. Okay, so if you'll look at the image here, we start at the beginning of time, and we have a lot of rock, very little soil. This is what we call pioneer plants. So this is things that can thrive on very little soil. This is your primary succession here. Okay, so as over time, as your soil begins to deepen, as it begins to grow in depth, you're going to have new plants that can be grown. Just kind of the small stuff at first, then you get into some shrubs, some short trees, and then you reach climax where you can get those deeply rooted trees. So think about your oaks in this case. So again, primary succession, you have those first few stages where everything's rock, where everything's kind of solid, there's not very much soil at all, and then it changes into deeper soil, you get larger trees, and then you get the huge trees like we have in the mountains here. That's your climax community. And if you'll notice, it says that this takes hundreds of years for this to develop. Okay, so think about those trees that we have, maybe you have in your backyard, that are huge oak trees or huge pine trees. Those have taken hundreds of years to develop to that size. Okay, so think about how old those are. Then we have something that's called secondary succession. And this is when you have a disturbance that affects the community. It alters it, it changes it, but it doesn't completely destroy it. Okay? So you still have that succession, but you have something that comes in and maybe wipes out a few things. So for example, logging, that would be a secondary succession. That's a disturbance to the community, but it doesn't completely destroy everything unless they clear cut the entire area. So some of these common disturbances, like I just said, logging is a big one. Fire, that's another issue that we have that causes secondary succession. And then farming is another one that causes secondary succession because it's changing, it's altering that land. Okay, and this is going to occur a lot faster than primary succession, so it will change the community more quickly, but it will also take longer to rebuild that community that it once had if it ever goes back to that point. So again, secondary succession, you have some event that begins. So in this example, you have a fire that happens, and then after that fire, you have from 0 to 150 years in order for that land, for that amount of trees, all of that to kind of come back into play. So keep that in mind. So biomes, we talked about biomes. Climax communities is another name for biomes, and they're characterized by a couple of things. It's the specific range of temperature, and it's the precipitation, as well as the biotic and abiotic conditions they share. And I know this image down here is kind of hard to see, but think about, we have grasslands, we have forests, we have tundras, we have rock and ice. All of those things are part of the biomes, okay? So here are some examples. These are the primary biomes. We have a tropical rainforest, dry forest savanna. We have desert, temperate rainforest, temperate forest, and temperate grassland. Now these are just the primaries, okay? So these are the most abundant that we see. So we have some others, the chaparral That's another primary biome, the boreal forest, and tundra, of course. We also have aquatic ecosystems. So this is freshwater and saltwater. It also includes areas that have sunlight and no sunlight. So let's go back and let's talk about production, primary production. If we talk about the gross primary production, this is the rate at which primary producers convert energy to biomass. Okay, so this is kind of like what it brings in. Okay, not the complete that it could possibly make, but this is what it actually is making. Okay, so photosynthesis has to occur here. Then you have what's the net primary production. Okay, so this is what this is your amount of biomass that you have that you can actually use. Okay, some of that production is going to be used by the plant itself so that it can go through cellular respiration, and you'll learn about that in biology. But your net, think about gross and net as far as your salary or what you make in a job. I know some or most of you don't have jobs at this point, but if you do have a job, you have a gross income. That's the amount you make before taxes are taken out. And then you have your net income, and that's what you actually bring home as far as what you get to spend for your expenses. So think about that as far as gross and net. That will help clarify those definitions. So warm, wet biomes, these generally have the highest rates of net primary productivity. So warm areas, very wet areas, so there's going to be a lot of precipitation in these areas. So think about your rainforests. And that would be it for today.